Welcome to Satsang. So beautiful to be together. Which is worse, failing or never trying? Never trying is absolutely worse than failing. For one very specific reason. Failing or succeeding is not in our hands. It's in the universe's hands. It's in someone else's hands. I may take an exam. The person who's grading the exam decides that what I've written is not what they were asking, and they give it an F. I might prepare a project, an idea, a presentation. The person I bring it to, or the committee I bring it to, deems it, nah, and they throw it in the trash can. Both of these are what you would call failure, and yet it has nothing to do with me. I've done my part. I've done it to the best of my ability, we hope. If not, then I haven't been sincere. But assuming that I've been sincere in my effort, I've done the best that was called upon me to do. But I have no control over the external world. And so while we certainly may be disappointed or annoyed or even hurt sometimes when the universe doesn't see what we've done as worthy of an A or an A+, or being accepted or being loved. Nonetheless, we are able, hopefully, to realize that it's not about me. It's about them. My teacher may have had a massive fight with her husband or his wife that day that put them in an awful mood. And due to that awful mood, they failed me on the exam. Has nothing to do with how well I studied, has nothing to do even with how intelligent what I wrote was, and everything to do with my teacher's cranky mood. Similarly, the boss, in front of whom I present a paper, a report, a proposal, may be in a cranky mood that day. May have had a fight with a loved one. May, for whatever reason, not like me. Maybe they're prejudiced. Maybe they discriminate. Maybe, who knows? And for those reasons, they fail something. Or they cause me to fail. But that has nothing to do with me. It's like doing your very best to plan a beautiful wedding, a beautiful outside wedding, and you do all your due diligence. You plan that wedding for, the time of year when it never rains. And you plan it all beautifully. And then it rains. Well, it could be said to be a failure as far as the fact that, you may feel horrible. Oh my God, this whole thing was a failure. We planned it and then it rained. But when you get out of that emotional reaction for a moment, you realize, I really did my best. There really was absolutely no way of knowing that it was going to rain. It's never rained on that year. I mean, just this year, for example, end of October we were having rain. Now, I've been in India 26 years. It never rains in October. Ever. Theoretically, the monsoons end September 15th. We've had rain up till end of September over the last several years. This year, literally, by last week of October, we had pouring rains. Never happened. But I mention it because if you had planned a wedding, you would have done it with the most sincere, skillful, efficient, effective, proper planning. But it's out of your hands. The universe decided it's going to rain. Climate change. What are you going to do? But we're able to realize when we take a deep breath that it's not about us, that we are not failures, that yes, it happened as things happen, but we are not the ones at fault. It's not me who failed. On the other hand, if I don't try, that's all on me. That's 100% on me. I did not try. I did not have the courage to risk failure. And so I didn't try, meaning I did not embrace my possibility, my potential, in some cases even my dharma, because I was so afraid of failure. That's on me 100%. And so, yeah, it's much worse not to try, because that's the stuff at the end of your life. I've never heard of anybody on their deathbed say, oh my God, I can't believe that stupid teacher failed me, or I can't believe that my boss didn't accept that proposal, or even I can't believe it rained on that wedding day. There's a bit of wisdom that tends to come at the end of life. And we tend not to hold grudges about others. It tends to be much more regret about what we didn't do. I didn't take that risk. I didn't have that courage. I didn't step up, stand up, open my heart. That's the stuff we regret. So, in the decision between not trying and possibly failing, always try. Now that doesn't mean be reckless. It doesn't mean be stupid. It doesn't mean jump into the deep end when you've never learned how to swim. Doesn't mean take all your money and invest it in one stock on a whim because you thought, well, hey, let me try the stock market. It doesn't mean recklessness. It means a courage of knowing that there's an intelligence in you. It's the same courage you can think of as that a caterpillar would use to climb the tree and weave a cocoon, not knowing what it's going to become when it comes out of the cocoon, not even knowing it ever is going to come out of the cocoon, never having seen a butterfly that it identifies as self. The same courage, you could say, that a tree uses when it grows sideways instead of straight up, which you see sometimes when you walk through the forest, right? Those are my favorite. Because they're the trees that somehow have that intelligence that says, yeah, I know everybody else is growing straight up, but if I do so, I'm going to suffocate and die. My light is that way. And against everything that you think trees are supposed to do, which is grow up, she grows sideways. So when I think of trying and I think of courage, it's that. It's the acknowledgement of an intelligence in the self. What Pujya Sadhviji calls the inner GPS. That inner knowing. That even though as a caterpillar, all of my family of caterpillars are still here crawling around as caterpillars, but I'm going to climb the tree. Or as a tree, that even though everyone else is going up, I know I need to go sideways. That knowing in the self. You could call it intuition. It's a way of knowing. That sense within us that says, I just know. And then, of course, the acculturated, indoctrinated part of us says, who are you to know anything? And it scares us out of that. And it pushes us away from our own inner voice. And it says things to us like, what are the neighbors going to say? What are your parents going to think? What if you don't make any money? What if people laugh at you? And it says all of those sorts of things to us in order to distract us from that sense of inner knowing, in order to scare us, in order to keep us in line. It would be like the trees shouting at the one, who are you to grow sideways? Don't you know trees don't grow sideways? What are you, stupid? But she knows. She goes that way. So, always try. Don't worry about failure. But make sure that you're connected to inner intelligence rather than a rebellious recklessness. That tends not to get you very many places. But that inner intelligence will show you where to go. And sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it fails. Sometimes it rains on picnics you've planned or weddings you've planned. But at least you know, at the end of your days, that you've stepped up to every plate of your life that the universe has offered and provided. Questions? Yes.
How do we resist temptations around us when the devil's on our
How do
shoulders?
we resist temptations around?
When the devil's on our shoulders trying to tell us to do things.
I'm so sorry. Can you speak just a little bit louder?
How do we resist temptations when the devil's on our shoulders trying to tell us things, to do things which are not good for us?
Okay. Yeah. Resisting temptation when there's voices and energies from inside, from outside, telling us. This is where the power of discrimination comes in. We speak about Jnana Yoga, a path of wisdom. Some people think that overcoming temptation is about willpower. And the dilemma is, willpower has a very short half-life. you can't maintain willpower for very long. As anybody who has tried to go on a diet, stop smoking or drinking or using drugs or doing anything that you've decided is bad for you, and you're just going to use willpower not to, you can do it for a little while. I mean, you can do it for the hour or two that you're sitting with friends who are having pizza and you're not going to eat pizza. And you can kind of, take your fingernails and drill them into your palms while you sit there and just don't eat pizza. But it's hard to maintain it for more than a couple of hours at a time. Which is why so frequently you may find yourself successful about not eating pizza. And then go home, of course, and, eat a whole pint of ice cream. Because the minute that you let down the guard, the minute that you actually exhale and take your fingernails out from driving them into your own palms, it all comes back, and then you go back to the old habits. So willpower, while being very useful and helpful for short-term things, it's great for things like dragging yourself out of bed to get you to meditate. Because chances are once you're out, and especially if you've had a shower, you're really unlikely to get back into bed. So it's great for things half an hour, 45 minutes, like just enough to get the covers off, get you out of bed, get you into the shower, get you sitting down to meditate. And then the benefit of the practice takes over and you no longer need to use willpower. Because you're not going to stop meditating halfway through and crawl back into bed. Because once you start, you're there. But if you're looking at temptation on a broader scale, we need more than willpower. And this is where discrimination, gyan, comes in. The first step is understanding why you need to not do whatever you're tempted to do. Because if you're not really convinced of it, you're not going to follow it for very long. Anybody who goes on a diet because somebody else tells them they need to lose weight doesn't usually last very long. Unless that someone else is the doctor who convinces them, they're going to die if they don't. But someone else telling you that you need to stop smoking, get in shape, get off of Facebook, whatever it may be, until and unless you're internally motivated, it's really hard to avoid temptation. Until and unless you know why you should be meditating in the morning, beyond simply that someone has told you, it's going to be really hard to sustain a practice of getting up every day and doing it. And this is where we bring in gyan. Whatever temptation you're trying to not give into, make sure you know very clearly why you're not giving into it. Not just because someone says, well, theek nahi hai. There's not a lot of energy in that. It's got to be yours. Why don't you want to smoke? Why do you want to be healthy? Why do you want to live a long, healthy life? Why do you want to grow spiritually? Really make sure that you have clarity inside of a goal that is what we would call an intrinsic goal. Right? There's two ways of being motivated. One is extrinsically, one is intrinsically. The extrinsic goal says, I say to you you should do this, and in order to make me happy, you're doing it. Again, it may last temporarily. If I just want you to do me a favor, it'll work. If I say, hey, for the next hour, just go and sit on the banks of Ganga. You'd do it. You like me, you respect me, you want to make me happy. I'll say okay, chalo, tika. I'll do it for an hour. But if I say to you, get up every day for the next 365 days and meditate an hour, if you don't have an intrinsic motivation for that, it's going to be a lot harder. For long-term change, we really need internal motivation. And so ask yourself, make a list, and then make photocopies of that list and post them all over your house. Why are you giving up junk food? Why are you stopping smoking? Remind yourself over and over again so that you know there is something you want more than the temptation. The dilemma is there's something in psychology called present bias. And what that means is that the present moment feels much bigger and more important to me than future moments. Now, interestingly, from a spiritual perspective, that's actually great, right? We talk about be here now, be in the present. So it's actually great that we all have a bit of this bias toward the present. The problem comes when it's in decision making. My present moment bias says, chocolate cake. It's going to taste so good. Or, I just want to watch the rest of this movie. It's so good. Yeah, I know it's midnight, but oh my God, I'm so engrossed. I know I've got to get up tomorrow morning, but wanting to watch the movie now is much more salient for me, much more present for me, powerful for me, than how I'm going to feel tomorrow morning when my alarm goes off at 5. And this is why when you're looking to really change habits or bring in new habits or overcome temptation, you have to get out of only thinking about the present moment. You have to also take your future self into consideration. And so it helps to sometimes have a conversation with your future self. Are you thinking about having a cigarette? Are you thinking about going to the bar and getting drunk? Are you thinking about sitting down to polish off a whole chocolate cake? Are you thinking about having an affair, doing something that you know you're going to regret later? Well, before you do that, take a moment and just tap into the you of an hour from now, or the you tomorrow morning, and see how that you is going to feel. And have a little conversation with you of the future and how they feel about the decision that you're making right now. And see if you can make that you as salient and present as the present you. And then that'll help you overcome the urge to do something that is just going to hurt the future you. Okay? So you've got a bunch of tools now. Good. Yes.
The profession that I am working in, I obviously cannot leave it because...
Can you speak a little louder if you hold the mic a little closer?
The profession that
Thanks.
I am working in, I'm doing so because it's my source of living. After a certain stage in life, I have noticed that after I've come here in the month of December, I've changed as a human being
Wonderful.
drastically.
Wonderful.
Now, when I went back to Mumbai and I started shooting again, the atmosphere that I am working in, my working conditions, are pretty negative. I am surrounded by people who are quite negative, unlike me. And I seem that I'm very receptive to those kind of vibes.
Yes.
And I get affected, and then maybe I have an anxiety attack, or I have the urge to take a cigarette. I don't want to do it,
Yeah.
but my surroundings are such that they compel me to do something that I do not want to.
Okay. Good. Great.
How do I make myself, I cannot stop working there, but what change do I bring in myself to be there, but yet be away from there?
Okay. Our surroundings impact us. They increase temptation. We'll take the temptation first, then the anxiety. They increase temptation, they impact us energetically with their values. As you say, they compel me to take a cigarette. It reminds me, very funny, true story. A man I know, a spiritual teacher who used to live in California, he had a friend, he used to tell this story about his friend who every day on the way to work, this friend would take the bus, get off at his bus stop, walking to work, but right at his bus stop, there was this big pastry store. And every day the guy would go into the pastry store as soon as he got off work and buy pastries, and then go to work and eat them. When he went on a diet, he had to stop going into the pastry store, even though it was right there when he got off the bus. And he found that he couldn't stop going into the pastry store. So he went to this man I knew, the spiritual teacher, and he said, "You've got to help me. Somehow do something to help me." He said, "Every day I decide I'm not going to buy pastries today, no pastries today. And then every day, without even realizing it, I find myself sitting at my desk with this bag of pastries." And so the spiritual teacher said to him, "Well, I have an idea." He said, "Why not leave your wallet at home?" And this guy says, "What? You want me to steal them?" Right? The idea that I wouldn't get pastries is so impossible, so inconceivable, that if you're telling me to leave my wallet at home, it must mean that you want me to steal them. The surroundings impact us, absolutely. We are energetic beings. Sit in a library full of people studying, you're much more likely to study than hanging out in your dorm room full of people drinking alcohol and dancing and listening to loud music. But just because the environment impacts us doesn't mean it compels us. Just because there was a pastry store did not mean the guy actually had to walk into it. Just because you are surrounded by people smoking does not actually mean you have to smoke. Any more than sitting at a table of people eating non-veg does not mean that you need to eat a hamburger. I cannot tell you how many tables of people I have sat at. I go to a lot of conferences, a lot of events. I move through a lot of different environments. I have sat at a lot of tables with people who are eating non-vegetarian food. It never would occur to me in a million years. Oh, well, they're all doing it, therefore why don't I also have a chicken McNugget or a steak? I mean, you just know I don't eat that. That isn't food to me. Doesn't matter how many people I'm surrounded by who might be eating hamburgers. There's no chance that I would eat them. And I don't say that in terms of I'm a better person, but just in terms of perspective of when you realize that something is absolutely not you. Doesn't matter how many people around you might be doing it. You're no more likely to do it. That doesn't mean that it isn't more difficult. If you've got a desire, a temptation, an inclination to smoke, even if on your own you wouldn't, and you surround yourself by people who are, yeah, of course, it's going to be harder. But what you have to realize is life is about what I call package deals. One of the really very large and I think very damaging messages that a lot of people are being given these days. Under the desire to make people feel empowered, I think we're actually crippling them. Because the messaging that a lot of people are getting these days is basically, if you can see it, you can create it. If you can envision it, you can manifest it. That essentially you can have anything and everything that you want as long as you can envision it. Now the dilemma with that is I may envision being able to rub my nose like this and kind of simultaneously live in 2 or 3 different places and, like Tabitha and Bewitched, and I could envision being able to do that and live in different planes of existence simultaneously or beam myself from one place to another. But the truth is that life is actually package deals. It's not a buffet. And I don't mean that to disempower us, but rather to re-empower us to actually live in a truthful situation, being able to make empowered decisions based on the reality of a situation, which is, I've got to choose a package. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not adjustments that can be made, but you cannot, for example, simultaneously live in 2 different places. You cannot simultaneously have 2 different full-time jobs. You cannot simultaneously be a full-time stay-at-home mother and a full-time, high-powered CEO career person. You can choose. You absolutely have the power to choose which one you want to be. And it doesn't mean that as a high-powered CEO career woman, you can't also have a child. But you just can't be a stay-at-home full-time mother. You've got to choose. And in the same way, you're going to have to make a choice and say, okay, this package deal of my profession that feels like my identity, that feels like who I am, comes with it this stuff that I wish the package didn't include. But you don't have a magic wand to make people in that industry stop smoking or stop drinking or stop doing whatever they're doing. You don't have a magic wand to change that environment. What you do have the power to do is to change you, and also to decide, is this a package that works for me? Because you're not stuck. A lot of us think we're stuck when we're not stuck. You need to ask yourself, what works for you? And if that is a package you want to stay in, then figure out to work on yourself. I mean, on a personal level, when I decided to live in India, well, if I had a magic wand, I have to, in all honesty and transparency, if I had a magic wand, there's a few things I would change. Not just about India, there's a few things I would change about anywhere I've lived in the world. But as a package deal, I would much rather live here than live anywhere else in the world. As a package. But since those things are things that I cannot change because I don't have a magic wand, and it's not a buffet, but a package deal, my only option then becomes to change myself such that those things don't bother me, such that they don't steal my peace. And that's, if you want to stay in that package, that's what you've got to work on, is how to not have the anxiety, how to not feel like you have to smoke just because everybody else is smoking.
No, it's not about others smoking, so I find the need to smoke. No. Actually, the thing is that the negative vibes
That's when you do it.
rub onto you. And I remain silent. I do not back answer, nor do I retaliate, because I don't want to become them. So I just keep quiet. That is the reason that I get anxious that why is the world like that?
And that leads you to smoke then.
That leads me to go on to take a smoke.
So in that case, what it means is we've got to work on your anxiety, which is to realize I'm not in charge of them. I'm only in charge of me. I can be a transmitter of energy. Rather than sitting alone, having anxiety and smoking and feeling like, why are they like that? If instead I could use that time to meditate, to connect with myself, to recharge myself, so that when I go into that environment, I can share and spread love and peace and good values. That's going to not only be beneficial for you, but it's going to actually impact the environment. And so what that means is that what you've got to do is work on the internal part. Let's say Chalotika Mange, you're going to stay in that environment. Accept that you're not going to change them. Accept that the change needs to come from within. Accept that your swastiti is not going to be determined by paristiti. That the external situation is not going to determine your internal situation. But rather that you're going to carry your swastiti into that paristiti and change them. Without the agenda that I'm going in here to change them. But just you're going to carry the love, carry the peace, carry the clarity into that situation that will vibrationally change them. Beautiful.
Ma'am,
Beautiful.
there's one more thing.
Yeah. Last. Yes.
Last.
That's okay.
When I am just trying to meditate, I'm learning, I still do not know how to meditate. I get 100 thoughts coming into my head when I am at peace with myself, why do these thoughts of random things which are completely irrelevant, why do they have to come? I mean, how do I stop that?
Beautiful. So, welcome to the package deal of being human. I've never heard of a human being who has sat down to start meditating who has not found that suddenly hundreds of random things come in their mind. It is the nature of the mind. It is why we talk about the mind being a monkey mind. Rather than worrying about the why, though, just accept it. Meaning, accept that that is the nature of the mind. It's like saying, why do puppy dogs run all over the place and pee on my couch? It's a puppy. It's what they do. Like, if you didn't want it to run around and pee on your couch, don't get a puppy. You sort of accept it as the package deal of what happens when you get a new puppy. This is the mind. However, it is the mind untrained. Think of the mind as a muscle. It isn't, biologically, but it is functionally. Meaning, even though it's not actually made of muscle fibers, it can be trained the way a muscle can be trained. It is taught the way that muscles are taught. If I lift this, right, over and over, it's full of water. It's not very heavy, but it's a little heavy. But if I do this, 100 or 200 times, eventually my bicep muscle is going to start to feel it. And if I do it 100 or 200 times every day, the bicep muscle is actually going to start to change. Right? I'm going to develop a muscle here. It's going to change based on the action that I am doing. I'm training it. I'm changing it. Deliberately, consciously. Think of the mind in the same way. You can train the mind. It is a muscle. Most of us, our minds are metaphorically like the flabby couch potato, right? Whose only exercise is an occasional, changing of the TV channel. That's what most of our minds are like. We've never bothered to actually get off of our metaphoric rear end and actually learn how the muscles work. When you start to meditate, that's when you start to learn. Okay. And so you work with it. And just like with the muscles of your body, there's different ways of working with it. But all of the different ways have some things in common. For example, we begin by giving the mind one thing. So it's in 100 places right now. You bring it to one place. Some teachers will have you focus on the breath. Some will have you focus on a mantra. Some maybe have you do both. Some might have you focus on a specific prayer or a word. Some might have you focus on an image of the divine with your eyes open. Or even a walking meditation. Some might have you focus simply on pure awareness. Just being fully aware. All of these are just techniques. They're techniques to take the mind from being all over and to actually pull it in deliberately, consciously, to train it to come somewhere. And then once we get it somewhere, then we start to be able to work with it more clearly. And then we start to be able to expand our awareness and consciousness. We start to be able to actually deepen the practice of mantra. We start to be able to find space, to relax into space between the thoughts. So in the beginning, it may be like mantra, 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 because my God, my mind is all over the place, and so I have to just keep my mantra, 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 mantra. Because otherwise, if I don't do that, my mind is all over. My breath, my breath, my breath, my breath, my breath, okay, my breath, my mantra, my breath, my mantra, my breath. In the beginning, it's like that. The minute you give your mind this much leash, it's all over the place. But slowly, 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 once you bring that mind, it actually starts to get still. And then slowly you may find, for example, that the breath starts to become almost imperceptible. And you can't really notice it anymore. And that's okay, because the mind is still still. And you may find that the mantra starts to just sort of chant itself almost in the background of your consciousness. And you no longer need to be deliberately doing it for dear life. And the mind is still. And then a thought arises, and you get distracted, and then again you go back to the breath or the mantra. And then again you find stillness. And then you start to be able to go deeper. And then you start to be able to become aware, not just aware of the breath, but aware of the one who is aware of the breath. Right? You start to be able to take steps backward or higher, depending on how your visual world works. For me, it feels like backwards. And then to even become aware of the one who's aware that you're aware of the breath. But it all begins with simply taking this mind and bringing it in. It's like if you look at a baby's legs, right? They're really cute. Why? Because they're so fat. Right? And they're all like these little, just look at the little legs or the arms of a baby. They're like these rolls of fat. They're so cute. But because the babies haven't used their legs yet, right? They get up to waddle, 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 and their little fat legs kind of hold them for a little while, then they fall. Once they start walking, and they actually develop muscle, well, then in a few short years, some of these kids become Olympic gymnasts. Some of them become Olympic ice skaters. You think, my God, how can they do that? Ballerinas, soccer players. How can they do that? Well, they've taken a muscle that a few years ago was nothing but fat that couldn't even hold them up. And now they've trained it with such subtle precision that standing on 2 toes, they can, right? On a blade, a metal blade, defying all laws of physics. Because they've been able to train that muscle so subtly by working with it day after day after day. And the mind is the same way. But we begin as the baby with the little fat legs, and it's like just, we start to work with it. We bring it in, we bring the mind in. And slowly, slowly we start to learn to refine it, to strengthen it, to get into its subtleties. And that's when it gets really, really beautiful. Wonderful. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your evening, everyone. A beautiful day to our family joining us from all over the world online. And if you didn't get a chance to ask your question today, we'll take it tomorrow. And so much love to you all.